Thanks again for tuning into the Replatform podcast. You're joining myself, James Gerd, and my co-host, Paul Rogers. How you doing, mate?
Getting there after, lots of technical issues this morning, but getting there now.
It's been a fun week for us on the podcast, isn't it? Wi-Fi's crashing, inability to record anything, loss of audio. Technology, it's great when it works.
Exactly, yeah.
Right, let's see how disrupted this episode becomes. So, just me and you today. We're talking about how to select a e-commerce agency partner and what to consider when selecting them. So we talked about this a lot. It's such a critical topic because it impacts everybody, whether you're doing replatforming or you're selecting other technology or you're looking for a marketing partner, etc. So what we're going to cover today is the risk of not taking selection seriously, key capabilities of a good partner, and how to find a suitable partner. Sound like a good setup for what we're going to talk about, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a really good topic.
Right, let's start at the beginning, because I think for people who aren't as experienced in this and who might not understand why it's so important to put the time and effort into it, what are the risks? Why should you take it seriously? What happens when you don't put enough attention and focus on this?
So I think, I guess it's really easy to just, so many agencies around with different levels of like capabilities across different platforms. I think, most agencies say the same thing in a lot of cases. So it's really easy to make a wrong decision. I think the big thing for me, and this is not necessarily directly relevant to this question, but it kind of is I think it's really important to really map out what you want from a partner. So we'll go on to capabilities later on, but when you're actually looking at capabilities, like I think one of the things that a lot of people get wrong is like it's kind of that thing as to like whether you want a development partner, which actually that's exactly what a lot of people do want, just someone that's really good at kind of the development and kind of knows platform inside out, or more of a commerce agency, the kind of holy grail of owning the roadmap, proactively suggesting things, that whole thing. And I think that's one of the things that can actually often lead to bad agency selection.
Yeah, the key things I've seen, that the issues that's caused if people underestimate the time that's required in the thinking is you can end up spending money you don't need to by buying services that aren't best aligned with your business and project needs. And that's waste. I've seen this before where people have signed up for packages they don't really need, they don't use, and it's burnt money. You can also get a partner that doesn't have the right skills and experience. So they could be really nice people who do a good job, but for example, they're not experts at ERP integrations, and actually that's a big part of what you want to do, and they don't have the skills to be able to do that as effectively as an agency that's done it 10, 20 times, and therefore they've got to build up knowledge within the project in order to cater that part. That can often mean that the budget goes up and also the project timeline can extend. And I think the other thing is, and you were touching on this earlier about knowing what you want, is if you don't know your decision criteria, how can you be objective, and how can you expect your whole stakeholder team in the business to be objective in evaluating and applying criteria that aren't well defined? Because you then it ends up being quite an emotional reaction thing of, I don't like them, I do. And then it's really hard to boil that down to, okay, well, how do we make a decision then? Because we don't have these criteria to tick off and go, well, actually, look, there's our evidence of which one's better for us or not. Yeah. So, yeah, it is. I guess it's an efficiency thing as much as anything.
Yeah, I think it's also really easy for people to think they want one thing and actually it doesn't necessarily match their team. And I guess that's kind of the role that me and you play with a lot of our clients, is kind of like just like really extracting out what they actually need from a service provider rather than like what looks good or what sounds good.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think as I've learned over the years as a consultant, but playing devil's advocate in a positive way is really important. So it's not to say I know best and you're wrong. It's okay. You want the top of the market, the best, the biggest agency. Why? What's driving that? Yeah, because if it's just a vanity play, do you really want to be paying for that additional service? Is there an underlying requirement that means that's actually a right way of thinking? It's good to challenge in a nice way and say, hey, look, are you sure your criteria are right for you and your business needs? One thing that we talk about a lot, and I know you feel quite strongly about this, is pros and cons of RFPs and how detailed you need to go in terms of doing a request for proposal. Do you need massive documentation, etc.? Do you want to share some insights in terms of when an RFP might be useful or not, and what some of the limitations of going down the RFP route?
Yeah, so I think I personally, I used to do a lot of RFPs and I now avoid them. And I much prefer working with a couple of agencies and like putting that time into like actually getting to know them, talking more about the requirements, talking more about like, longer term plans and like really getting a feel for like how they might approach things. So like more informal, but maybe, just allocating all of that time they might have put into like a response and thinking about the response, everything else into like, sitting in a room and going through stuff. But equally, the only thing I would say is usually those two agencies I've probably worked with before, so I don't have to like gather all of that information. I think where RFPs are really useful is where you've got a business that's doing something new and they actually don't have that context around the partners. And I think it is quite a good way to essentially get like a set of information on those agencies. It's like unified that you can actually like judge against and get a bit more of a feel as to like how they meet the kind of requirements for the project. So I do think there's a role there, but I think just if I was doing like a Magento project or a Shopify project, I would probably avoid it where possible. But equally, I can see how it can be valuable.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I think times have moved on in terms of formality of process to being a bit more flexible in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And I go through this a lot where I say to people, okay, the biggest challenge is split and re-platform, picking the technology vendor, because the technology is the enabler. And if you have the wrong platform, then it's going to be a lot harder to achieve what you want to do operationally, or to get the right functionality, or to do it in a cost-effective way, or to have the right admin tools for the teams to use it day to day in anger. Once you've got that, I agree with you that the next bit then is more of a cultural and a capability fit. And if you know the agency landscape, that's where you can add value to say to people, look, you don't need to go out to 4 or 5 people based on the profile of your business and the type of partner you need. There's 1 or 2 that fit really well, and you can speed things up. And sometimes also companies already have an agency in mind that they know. I worked with a client in the charity space, and they had an agency recommended to a Magento agency who'd worked with a few other organizations that they trusted and had really good relationships with, and had very good project delivery experience and really good service experience. And that credibility that those references gave them made them want to work with that agency rather than go out and find another one where they didn't have that same level of validation. So I think it's horses for courses. And there are times when you don't need to do this. And there are other times where actually that extra level of due diligence might be required to get internal teams to buy in and sign off on the project.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess the other use case where it is essential, I've seen it in some businesses I've worked with are a bit more traditional and have structured procurement processes in place. Actually, an RFP has had to take place in order for the procurement stakeholder to sign off because of the governance structure of the business. So sometimes governance structures demand an RFP, even if it is a functional box ticking exercise.
Yeah, I think I worked on one big project of a government organisation a while back, and they were forced to run an RFP, and they had to run it via this kind of government portal. And I think that's such a horrible process. And it ended up like a really bad outcome where they essentially had 2 options. They were forced because they went into it with 2 platform options, and they were actually forced into the platform decision in the end, just based on one partner being ruled out for some of the things that were in their final.
Yeah. It's a really good point, because in certain circles, there's litigation around not running proper RFPs. People can actually put in complaints if they're not being considered and think they've been disadvantaged. And a lot of big in some industries in like manufacturing and construction, etc., the RFP is an essential part of the tendering process. Yeah. I think another use case where I found it useful, I did it with a client where they were had investment in the background where they were looking to bring investment in. And one of the advice I gave them is that you're going to be investing in a platform. You don't yet know who the investors are going to be or where that's going. In order to seem credible at that level with potential investors, you need to be able to demonstrate structure and proper business rationale and thinking and a business case for it, because that will give them the confidence, and that can help with the investor relations. So sometimes it's a documentation and structure play in order to make your business look how you need it to look for a certain goal.
And I think that can apply to stakeholders as well. I did one where we had to do it purely to have like a paper trail, because there's a particularly diligent stakeholder, essentially. We already knew that he was going to scrutinize everything we brought to the table, so we kind of had to run it.
Yeah, my advice to people is regardless of what size of project, what your needs are in terms of having to do stuff to get things ticked off, is there's a minimum level of kind of scrutiny, which are disciplines of RFPs that you should follow, and that is having clear criteria for selection and having a minimum set of documentation to back up that selection process. So, I've done this before where you have you build out a proper cost model and have a cost model comparison now and then. You have a weighted decision matrix based on the functional needs, and you evaluate and make sure that you've been able to just say, yes, we've assessed this criteria and have confirmed that we've got the coverage we need. I think doing that as a minimum, even if you don't need a formal structured process, it just gives you peace of mind, and also means if anyone in the future comes in and says, well, why did we do this? You don't have to sit there and try and remember what happened in a project 12 months ago. You've got the documentation there to say, well, here you go. This is what we did, and this is why I made the decision.
Makes sense.
Right, with that in mind, let's get into the more exciting part of the discussion, which is key capabilities for a good partner. So what have you learned over the years? What makes a good partner and why?
So I think this is a really big one. I know you've put some really good ones here. For me, I usually spend a lot of time assessing the project team's experience and kind of experience with the platform, experience of delivering other complex, similar projects. And that's usually where I would spend a lot of time, I guess. And I say the project team rather than the agency, because obviously agencies will share knowledge between people, everything else, but actually the project team is key. And I think that the main points of contact for the client as well as part of that project team, so usually be it an SA or a technical team lead or whoever is going to be the main kind of technical problem solving contact. I think that person usually has a massive influence on the project, and then any kind of day-to-day PMs, etc. as well, and dependent on the project, maybe any BAs, etc. And then ideally you'd have a view on developers as well, and any kind of creative people that are working on the project. But that's my first one. I think that's really important.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's got to be project basis, because what are the biggest risks that could screw you up in terms of project delivery timelines, budgets, success and failure? Yeah, I mean, a good example of that is I worked on a project where there was a separate B2C and B2B platform, and there was a lot of inefficiency in terms of managing the two because of all the different back-end processes, data flows. And one of the big challenges in the project was bringing B2C and B2B into a single platform, and how they manage those storefronts and the custom requirements in the B2B side, and finding a partner who had gone through that process of consolidation before for another business to deliver a single platform but with multiple channels effectively was one of the big risk factors. And that had to be evidence, and there had to be demonstration of how that was handled, what they learned about the key risks for the client, how they helped the client through the process, and what the client needed to focus on. And that really helped get the client team bought into the right partner, because it's right, you've gone through this before, so you know what we're going to face. So yeah, definitely agree with you. What else? So after that, you go through the team capability, this specific skills match. What next do you look for?
I think, and this does vary massively depending on the client, but the one that I've put here that I think is quite topical at the moment and currently as important as anything else is capacity. So particularly within Shopify, so most of the projects we work on at the moment, Shopify, I think capacity actually is as important as the agency's overall credentials and experience and everything else, because you could have the worst experience with a big agency or the best experience with a much smaller agency, and I do think that's really important. I wouldn't say it's the most important thing, but I would say it's something these days that you really need to kind of do due diligence on.
Yeah, exactly. So are you talking about capacity as in
availability, like, how many other concurrent builds, because a lot of these agencies are winning so much work at the moment. They're growing so quickly. And I think anyone and most agencies in the e-com space fall into this. But, people are kind of doubling in size, that when you're kind of doing more builds, there's more people going into retainer, key people within the business are more stretched. Like, I've definitely seen this a lot with agencies, basically, where they've grown really quickly, and then it does impact kind of delivery, or they've just taken on a little bit too much work, and it happens to any agencies. Even our agency on the paid side, there's been periods where we've probably got a bit too busy, or maybe there's like an unexpected amount of work, and then it impacts delivery for a while. And I think that's just something you need to do due diligence on.
100%. And I think linked to that is team size and balance, because are they top weighted, bottom weighted? Do they have a good distribution of skills, from leadership, strategic thinking, to experienced subject matter experts, to more junior teams, but where you have extra bandwidth to drive through velocity? I think that's critical, because you don't want everyone to be a thinker and not have people who are able to execute at skill to a good standard. There has to be a blend of those skills. And this comes back down to what type of partner you want, because some businesses, they don't care about strategic thinking. They've got a lot of senior strategy people in the business. They understand where they're going. They just need a highly reliable technical partner that's got all of the core technical expertise and can deliver at scale and to the speed they need, versus others who aren't quite as experienced and want that additional level of insight and support, advice, guidance, input into road mapping, etc. So that team size and balance is really important alongside that.
Yeah. And then, like you say, I think, and this goes back to that point of knowing what you want, but some of the ones in here where there's a few more variables is like, that strategy piece, or design is a big one. So there's an agency that I really rate called Code in the Netherlands, who, they are a technical agency. They don't really do design, but they can demonstrate, like a level of knowledge around things like performance. They've got various kind of bits of tooling internally that kind of help them from a technical perspective. They'd almost definitely be paired with like a third-party design partner, and I think that comes back down to like knowing what you want, or if you're doing design in-house, etc. But I think that's another one that I guess it depends though. Like there are a lot of people do want one agency. Actually, I think I'm just going through a bit of a phase at the moment, but a lot of people do want design and development together. And I guess if you're looking to assess design, you need to kind of go through the portfolio, you need to talk to the agency, you need to validate all of that kind of stuff. Because the other thing is, it's a lot of agencies have got a great portfolio, but actually there has been external inputs into design, or the designer that's delivered half of their best sites has left, etc. It all needs due diligence.
Yeah, it does. And I think the technical capabilities are an important one, because there are two elements on there. There are process, discipline, and standards. So how well structured are they? How well do they understand the alignment of different development resources to push work into streams, into sprints, to release planning? Because the control there's got to, you could have great developers and crap process, or the other way around. So you've got to validate both of them. But also it's about how hot and proactive are they on where things are going and learning and improving. One of the areas you talked about it just a minute ago about performance, and this for me is an area that I always encourage clients to push on, is you can write beautiful code, but if the way that the application's set up and is not efficient, or if the way that they've built out the back end and integrated with things like CDNs and all of the myriad of configuration properties that go into influencing performance and speed, etc., are not understood and thought through, you could end up having a great looking website that is slow, or certain elements of it. So like maybe when people get into checkouts or other user journeys, it slows down and it's not very good from a customer experience point of view. So increasingly pushing in areas like that, say how detailed is your understanding of what you need to do at back and front end to get speed and performance nailed?
I think that a sub point to that as well is kind of account management and proactiveness. So I think that, for example, that performance piece, often, a client might come to the table and they say, I want 3 different, personalization vendors, all of which have their own kind of third-party JavaScript. Things like that can slow the site down. You want in a lot of cases, you want someone from the agency to be like, no, we've used this before, we've used this before, or here's a way around it. That's another one. And then I think going back to your last point, I think delivery is probably right at the top for most in a lot of cases. Like, actually, like planning, there's a lot of agencies that aren't brilliant at managing a timeline, or kind of, I guess given visibility of like completeness, all of that kind of stuff. And I think that QA, like some of those bits, can be really important as well.
Yeah. One question I like to ask people, being the annoying consultant in the room, is talk me through your end-to-end process. So I'm a client, I've given you a brief for a new piece of work, and give them an example like, okay, we want to integrate, or we want to enhance shopping lists to create multi-list, shoppable list, whatever it is. How do you take a brief from us? How do you scrutinize it? How do you ensure that the brief, you've understood it? What process do you go in internally for assessing, evaluating, and knowing what the development requirements are and proposing it back? And how do you plan for contingency? And so to understand the thinking process and who gets involved, because I think that's really important, because come back to that point you made earlier about the account lead side, who's able to say, look, okay, great, you want to do this, but there is actually a better way, because we learned this and we found that doing it like this might improve it. It will cost you an extra £1,000, but actually here's the efficiencies. You want to know that there is a process that will tease that out, rather than someone just taking a brief old school, which is got your brief, we're building what you've asked for, and actually it's not the best thing for the client.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think QA is another important one. Like there's a key question that can often be really, like it's an easy question to ask, but like just asking like what their standard like processes are around, which devices, browsers, operating systems, etc. they're testing on, because a lot of agencies, there might be like some level of developer testing on Mac Chrome, but that's actually not really that valuable or relevant to the client. And I think that's an important one to kind of dig a bit deeper on as well, because that can actually make a big difference, and it can save an agency that's got proper testers and QAs can save your team a lot of time. Yes. And help the project to actually be delivered on time.
Completely. And actually, that's such an important point, because the quality of the QA team will influence the strength of the relationship going forward. So I've seen this in a client recently where the developer was just trying to keep up with the client's pace and was just churning stuff out. But clearly the QA was not being done properly, because so much stuff was getting into staging that was inaccurate, and there were obvious errors in some of the releases. And all it did was erode trust in the development quality, and it ended up with the client getting really pissed off and angry. And that took time to rebuild that relationship to the point of trust. So, yeah, I would agree. A solid QA process, and also knowing that a development partner will be willing to fight back and say, that's not the best thing. No, we're not going to get that done by Tuesday because we don't have the time to do it properly. It's going to take this time to do it well, and being strong enough to manage the client back. So, depending on who you are as a business, finding a partner that's stronger in terms of managing your expectations rather than just doing what you want can be really important.
And dependent on the platform or tech stack, you might also want to be thinking about things like automated testing, regression testing, hand testing, etc.
Yeah,
within that.
Yeah. Another one for me that's really important and often overlooked is the cultural fit, because if you find a great partner who can deliver work, but you don't get on with them, there are communication barriers. It's not an enjoyable time to pick up the phone or go to meetings. That can erode the partnership over time. And it is a partnership. It's a strategic partnership. So finding people that you just gel with, to me, it is important. I mean, obviously, if they don't have the technical capabilities and the skills and the experience, that's not good. But assuming that's in place, finding somebody who you can just get on with can often be the deciding point in a RFP process anyway. Well, actually, we just like them. We can't rate them technically any better, but we like them.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else for you? Anything else? So we've talked about the technical, the resourcing, the team structures, expertise, cultural fit. Anything else for you in terms of what you look for?
So you've got community written down here, and I think I'd go as far as like ecosystem, I guess, because particularly in the Shopify and big commerce world now, there's these big ecosystems. You've got all these different tech partners. The actual role of the development agencies is being reduced as a result of all these additional third parties that are relied heavily on, and having experience with those, and being able to input into conversations around all the things around the platform. I think that's quite important as well.
Yeah, I agree. Again, it can, for some people, they're not so worried about it and they just want somebody who can do work. For quite a few of the business, I've worked with a lot of charities, and for them, because they don't have big internal e-commerce teams, knowing somebody has an active ecosystem there, they contribute to the community, and there's an element of thought leadership, gives them that extra level of reassurance because they feel like that person is helping to shape rather than just follow. So I think the ecosystem and how they contribute in terms of thinking can be equally important. And the last one for me is where you talked about in terms of scale and resourcing, which is I completely agree with. Linked to that is where you fit in the portfolio. It's like big fish, little fish scenario. Do you want to be the biggest client? And therefore, you're critical to their portfolio. Are you happy being a smaller part of the business, but part of a wider ecosystem? Like, what do you want to be and why? And there are pros and cons to each. Like being the biggest fish can be a bit of an issue because often you're the one who's helping to lead their innovation, and you're not getting as much learning from businesses that are bigger than yours that are helping drive roadmap items down. But the other way around, if you're too small, you can sometimes get absorbed and not get the best resources. You might feel like you're not getting the attention and that you're not getting the best skills because they're being dedicated to the bigger clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one's really important. I've seen benefits from being the biggest, but in my opinion, never want to be someone's smallest client. There's usually very little benefit unless it's maybe in a situation where there's, a lot of proprietary technology and things like that. One of the other things that I would say is it's important to do kind of due diligence around what the agency expects you to spend over the next 3 years. Because I think that's often where post-launch, I've seen a load of clients go through a really good build process and then really fall out of the agency because they're under prioritized, or they're spending $4,000 a month, but the agency isn't interested in a client that doesn't spend 150, 200 grand a year. And I think that's something that always needs to be factored in. And then the ongoing retainer generally, just like how that's approached, managed, how releases are managed, all of that kind of stuff, I think is something else that needs to be discussed. And because clients have different, a lot of our clients right now get frustrated around lack of organization, but equally some of our clients want less organization. It just needs to fit again. The two sides need to kind of marry up, and that just needs to be part of the selection criteria.
Yeah, so let's go on to our final key topic, which is due diligence. And we both believe strongly in this is you've got to, once you've selected someone, you've got to really then do a final due diligence process to make sure that it's almost to challenge your own bias, right? Are we really making the right decision? And that's why when we talked about earlier about having clear criteria, decision criteria at the start, whether you're doing a structured or informal RFP process, helps you here now, because you can work about whether you've lost sight of your vision or whether you're actually making the right decision. So I'll start with one. For me, and I know we talked about this yesterday when we were planning this podcast, is testimonials. An agency will only ever give you testimonials that are positive. They're not going to send you a client that's pissed off or they had a bad relationship with. That's just never happens. Yeah. Therefore, getting testimonials from an agency, fine, you do learn something, but you've got to go and get your own. You need to go and speak to somebody who's not incentivized or has not already said, yes, I'm willing to be a testimonial. Go and hear from people. Use your own industry sources. Be transparent about it. I always say to agencies, we are going to speak to people who aren't on your testimonial list for obvious reasons. I would never disclose who, because it's confidential. Yeah. But often reach out through your networks, find somebody who knows somebody. Half the time when I've done this, I've reached out to people I know, whether it's you, Paul, or someone else, and said, hey, you guys got contacts here. I'd love to have a chat with the head of e-commerce or the ops director to ask them a few questions. Are they willing to? And I've had some brilliant insights from people over the years from some big businesses who've given me, warts and all, pros and cons, objective feedback, and that really helps you to make it. And also, it can sometimes reveal some things you hadn't thought about in your selection process, where you can then go back and go, hey, actually, we've got to validate these two things before we sign off on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I always talk to other clients that maybe haven't been given us a reference, or more clients. I think that's really important. I think we talked about the project team. I think that's really important, like really getting an understanding of, what other projects those people have worked on, how long they've worked for the business, level of experience, how they work, all that kind of stuff. Because, for me, the level of project we work on, the agency PM is usually pretty critical.
Yeah.
If that person, doesn't work in a certain way, or maybe, is too stretched, or, not experienced enough, that will massively impact the delivery of the project.
Definitely. One of my favourites is just go asking the agency pitching team and say, right, what's gone wrong in previous projects? What did you learn, and how have you changed the result? And can you tell me things where it went wrong because of the client, and how you had to manage that sensibly, and also where you guys cocked up and you had to handle that and own that? Because if anyone says, oh, we've never had a problem, I don't trust that at all, because no project ever runs 100% smoothly. I know, having done a shed load of these projects, I've made mistakes, and I've had to face up to that and learn from it and realise why I made it and be honest and transparent about it. So knowing that somebody will be willing to admit to something and work to fix it is such an important quality.
Yeah, agreed.
What else for you then? What else do you do for due diligence?
Yeah, so I think you looking at the client's portfolio, you've listed it here, but I think, how they've approached certain things, looking at, how they've maybe worked around some of the weaknesses of the platform, performance, accessibility, creative, if the agency is responsible for creative, maybe how a site's progressed from launch, all of that kind of stuff. I think that's really important. Looking at the relevance of some of the sites within the portfolio, how complex the builds are likely to be, all of that kind of stuff. I think that's one of the obvious ones. Yeah,
definitely. And my final, I say final, it's not, because obviously there are more you can do. But the last one of my key areas I push for is asking around the development and project management community to get a feeling about the place and their standards of practice. A good example, I've got a good friend who's a project director and has worked pretty much exclusively on hybrid projects over about the last 10 years. And whenever and I know the kind of agencies you work with, and whenever I've needed a little bit of feedback around those agencies, and some of these agencies are hybrid ones who work on hybrids and other platforms, I go to him and go, right, what are they like internally? Like, how is it chaos? Is it well structured? Do clients get a really good service? Are there any gotchas I need to watch out for? Just off the record feedback. Because if all developers who work with agencies say it's built on sand and the development practice is crap and that's why we left, it's a red flag. If they say, hey, look, I loved working there, it wasn't perfect, but do you know what? They really do try and do their best. It gives me a level of reassurance, because developers can be pretty savage sometimes about talking about processes and controls.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's for our core points on selecting and finding the right partner. Lots of interesting stuff discussed, hopefully interesting for you all. Paul, what would be your kind of like wrap-up takeaway point?
We talked about it, but just be diligent. I think just go beyond, a normal sales process. Make sure that you're kind of really getting an understanding of how an agency fits long-term. Talk to as many people as you can, really look into the project team, all the stuff we talked about, really. Just be diligent. Yeah,
I think that's a really nice. Make sure you have a structured process. I always say this, and it doesn't have to be complicated, but just know why you're making a decision. And if you don't know why you're making a decision, don't make it until you do, basically. Better to slow the process down than end up regretting it 6 months down the line. Cool. So thanks as always for listening. Keep an ear out for the next episodes, and let us know of any topics you'd like us to cover. Look, we'd love you to subscribe if you haven't already, or to give us a rating on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. No, we really appreciate it. It helps us. It also, the more we get, then the more it encourages us to keep doing this, because we know that the content's proven useful. Look forward to you joining us again next week. For more information on this topic, head over to replatform.fm for our audio podcasts. To discuss a project, or if you'd like to chat about any of the topics covered in this episode in more detail, please reach out to myself, James Gurd, or my co-host Paul Rogers via LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks again for listening, and keep your ears peeled for the next episode.